right, we are live. And we have a few people still filtering in, so we might just give them 1 minute. But Corey and Keshvi.
Hello.
Happy Thursday, everyone.
Either the start of the day or the end of the day, depending where you're joining from. Keshvi already had a full Thursday, and I'm just getting started.
Absolutely, it's 5 o'clock GMT time over here.
And Corey, you're just saying you're in Poland at the moment.
Yeah, so also end of the day, but the beginning.
All right, maybe just 1 more minute, and then we can kick off. For anyone just joining, we will save a bit of time at the end for any Q&A. So any questions you have, feel free to drop them into the chat in the bottom right, and we'll get to those. Perfect. Well, I think we'll get started. We have a good number of folks already joined and more coming. So just a quick nod to our co-organizer, the Future List, which is a global innovation discovery platform, community and event series. They have over 9K founders, 1,500 investors. Definitely check them out at app.thefuturelist.com. And just taking a step back, we sort of just thinking about how VCs have always relied on their networks to source investment opportunities. And today, the ability for a VC fund to effectively map and leverage their relationships is essential, and it covers so many different parts of the business, from fundraising in the first place to then sourcing deals, picking deals, winning deals, due diligence, portfolio support, and all the aspects that are involved with that, from recruiting to sales intros to partnership intros to recruiting intros. Network of a firm touches so many different aspects of how the fund not only operates but performs in the market. And I think we're starting to gain a level of sort of maturity in how we kind of think about the internal role for that network ops and the network function within a firm. So it's my great pleasure to have alongside me today Corey Bolotsky, VC Platform Consultant and Director at the VC Platform Global Community. If you haven't already heard about it, which I'm sure you have, it's a thriving community of thousands of VC professionals focusing on recognizing and sharing standards of excellence in the profession. They've done some amazing work already, and if you don't already know them, you definitely will over the next few months and years. Keshvi is the head of product at Boulderton and leads the strategy and implementation of all investment, team and portfolio value add related products. And it's my pleasure to have both of you on today. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having us.
From my side, I'm the co-founder and CEO of The Swarm. I used to be at Sequoia Capital, where I was building them internal data and networking tools for the internal investment team and the portfolio. They acquired my last startup, which was an outbound recruiting automation company called Automately. And The Swarm is a platform that helps you to map and leverage the relationships of your firm. So let's jump into it. Corey, I want to start with you first. You launched the VC platform community in 2017, like 7 years ago. Was network ops a thing back then? How has the platform team evolved since then?
Yeah. So, and you're totally right there. The VC platform community came together organically by a bunch of us. I see Ali in the call and a bunch of others that were very early in this that came together. And I think if you look back a decade ago, 8 years ago in the venture world, what I would say is that network operations was a thing, but it was really hard. And it was sort of this pipe dream. I think a story I like to share is a fund I worked at many years ago. The general partner had always had an index card, literally little paper index card on his desk, and handwritten on there were 30 names. And those 30 names were the 30 important people that he needed to remember to catch up with every quarter. And he would remake that index card every single quarter. And that was network operations. And I think there was always this vision of how do we turn that index card into software? How do we automate these relationships and do it at a broader scale? But it wasn't really possible, and there weren't tools for this nascent world of venture a decade ago like there are today.
Yeah, I love that. Sort of from index cards to spreadsheets, and then to all the different tools available today.
Oh yeah.
Keshvi, maybe from your side, tell us maybe a little bit about your experience as a product leader before joining Alderton, and how did it lead you to what you're doing today?
Yeah, of course, happy to. So before Balderton, many moons ago, I was working in product at a fintech here in London. I joined because, and you'll start to see a thread in the roles that I've taken. I joined because the bank at the time that I joined was very much a bank rather than a fintech. And so I joined as one of the initial kind of product leaders in the organization to actually sort of transform the way that they worked, and to start being a bit more data driven and tech driven with what they were doing day to day. So that was really why I started that job and started doing product there. And actually, the exact same thread was present when the Balderton opportunity came knocking, in that I personally feel, and I think both of you share this, that VC is sort of at a similar turning point where it's starting to become more data driven, more tech driven, and actually network and leveraging your network and using technology to do that is actually just the next stage, really. I think it's a really exciting problem to solve with tech as well, because it's not one that people traditionally think about.
Yeah, and the tooling in the VC space has been pretty nascent, for a while, and I think the maturity of some of the other categories like sales tech and martech have been exploded with thousands of tools and these really advanced technologies, and VC's kind of got left behind in some ways. But now what we're seeing, as you said, over the past couple of years at least, like this rise of the data-driven VC model, like with Andre's got a great community there with data-driven VCs, and now we're seeing the VC platform community, this recognition of thousands of internal folks that you actually can improve the performance of the entire firm with this role. Maybe Corey, do you want to just touch on that? I know you had a report that came out relatively recently that highlighted some of the benefits of having someone internally working on these efforts. Maybe just touch on that quickly, how that helps to drive the performance of a firm.
Totally. I mean, I think there's so many different parts of platform that impact and drive the performance of a fund. I think in the context of this conversation, what we're talking about is the core of venture, right? Venture is a knowledge business. It's around what you know and who you know and how you use that information to make decisions and grow businesses. And that is inherently not something that's scalable, right? This isn't a business that drives growth through high velocity marketing automation, right? That's just not the business we're in. And up until a few years ago, it was sort of purposely difficult to do that. I think that many of us would come up with these visions of here's how we're automating and scaling our network. And we would tell that to our LPs and have these like really bold visions, but it was still hard, right? Like I think people would say, oh, we have this incredible corporate network and we can query it and automatically align a portfolio company's pipeline in Salesforce with their leads, right? that wasn't automated, right? It was putting it into a Google Doc and doing Command F and trying to find whose company
Right.
was Google or Microsoft or Salesforce. And that actually worked. Um, and that's still where a lot of firms are today. Um, but I think that what has started to happen is that tools like the Swarm and many others have given us tools to say, okay, how do we actually take that vision and make it a reality? And I think um, to your question, if we are able to help inform our decisions with more efficient access to insights, right? Experts, or if we're more efficiently able to support our portfolio with more connections to be it a talent pipeline or a customer pipeline or an investor pipeline, um, that at the end of the day is what creates and drives value, and it makes us better at our jobs. But I think we'll talk about this a little bit later. It's really hard to measure that. It's really hard to
Um,
measure that it actually works. And it takes 10 to 15 years right now to see any sort of manifestation of that. So today, Kashmi and I can say it's easier and it's working, but we have no idea.
so Kashmir, there's all these different programs you can run. As Corey said, maybe the time period until you actually see the ROI in it can be years. How do you prioritize what programs you work on at Bulletin?
It's a really, really good question. And I love this question around how do you measure, because there's never a right answer, is then you can constantly get better at it. To Corey's point around these indicators actually being measured 10 to 15 years away sometimes. I found that the best way to prioritize programs instead to think about, okay, what drives those indicators? So if I know, for example, that if we go and see the right deals at the right time, we're connected to the right people, I can increase the throughput, we can optimize for our conversion. These are all very technical terms, but you're saying if I get what's coming into the funnel to be as good as possible, then hopefully in 10 to 15 years, what goes out the other side is probably going to be quite good. And that's really what I always recommend using to kind of choose what you work on. The nature of venture and where we are, there's so much exciting stuff that you can do with tech and data. Are we looking at data-driven sourcing, or how to scale talent as a service across hundreds of portfolio companies, or do we look at how we can leverage our network better? What to choose is almost the hardest question. And so my instinct is always to come back down to the data and the metrics and say, okay, what's really going to move the needle in that funnel? And that's where I try and prioritize my time.
So maybe double clicking on that, Corey, like thinking about the data and the metrics, like from your side, can you think of any KPIs to consider, and for folks who are just getting started setting this up, like how would you recommend to measure success?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you want to focus. And I think that's the first thing I would say is if you want to focus on activating your network, let's first say what that means, right? Maybe it's we want to activate our expert network to support diligence, right? And if that's what you're doing, maybe today you're spending X amount of money on GLG or any of those sort of expert networks, and you can augment that spend by activating your internal network, or maybe even get higher quality or more trusted insight. That is a short-term measurable activity where you can say how many network-driven diligence inputs did we have this quarter or this year. Maybe it's on the talent front, right? Is there a way that we can say, how did we utilize the data and the relationships in our network to deliver candidates to this CEO for this job opening? I think there's a very intentional reason, though, why I'm talking about broad quantification and not specific is, I mean, David, you've done this more than I have, right? We can produce 20 incredible candidates for a job opening, and the CEO is going to hire candidate 21. And so
Mhm.
looking only at how is this driving hires or how is this driving investments, one is a hard thing to look at, and that's really what takes 10 to 15 years to prove it works. Two, in our role, I think it can be demotivating, right? You're like, I facilitated 100 intros this quarter and none of them turned into a signed customer for my portfolio. But focus on that 100 intros, and why is it that we're able to do it quicker and more efficient today than ever before?
Yeah, I
100%.
remember. So go ahead, Kashfi. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in there and say I absolutely 100% agree with this piece around beware of volume. I'm so on the same page that sometimes the OKRs that you set yourself end up actually causing the problems because they're not pointing at the right thing. And this is where, if anyone's in this situation, I'd really recommend thinking about qualitative as well as quantitative. So you have your quantitative metrics, a volume or like a guideline, but at the same time, it's going to be those individual connection stories. That one place where you were in exactly the right place at the right time, made the right connection, and it was a complete gemstone. I think that's what I've seen drive a lot of buy-in internally, and ultimately what's going to enable you to scale some of your programs, because that will resonate with people. So think about that example where you found exactly the right interim CFO because you'd met them last week at some drinks and you just happened to have the portfolio company for them, and they ended up transforming. Have those alongside your data.
Yeah, to double click on that, I remember when I was at Sequoia, we used to send out these founder surveys, a few times a year, so asking the founders, what was the most helpful, important thing that we did for you? And then if we could do one thing moving forward, like what would it be? And so gathering both the quantitative as well as the qualitative, ideas and feedback. And the difficult thing is in the platform model, you have these multiple customers that you're serving, right? You have the founders in the portfolio, but then you have the internal GPs, and then to an extent you have the LPs as well. So, Keshvi, do you have any sort of idea or rubric internally, like how you divide your time between these different customers? Do the GPs decide for you? How do you kind of balance those different customer priorities?
It's a very good question. Honestly, David, I don't have an answer. If anyone has it, please tell me. In a situation like that, I always come back to my kind of product principles, and I do a good old what's called a design sprint. Mm-hmm. So I go around, get the feedback, the thoughts, what are your burning fires from all of my internal stakeholders, from an analyst all the way up to one of our GPs and the heads of departments. And then I group them into kind of what the problem areas are. And a lot of the time, the problem areas are common. You just have to group them together well. I love a Post-it board. I love writing these things down on Post-its and grouping them. And that's how I tend to figure out, okay, actually all of these bits of feedback are joined up in one place, and then it's really easy to justify back to your stakeholders as well that I'm not going to do this thing that I told you I would potentially have time to do. That's because all these 5 people here have all told me about this other problem that's actually much bigger and much more of a root cause. So trying to, again, bring it back to as much objectivity as is possible.
Yeah. I'll add to that, Kashfi. I think in my experience, it also changes for someone in a network or a platform role. It changes over your tenure in that firm, right? When you're 10 years into your role, right, you are able to look at the portfolio and know where should I focus, what's going to be the most important lever, and whatnot. I think for folks earlier in this journey, one of the biggest things I would recommend is to really look at and listen to your GPs to guide some level of prioritization. And specifically that prioritization, I would say, is around which companies to focus your time on. What I mean by that is in a platform role or a network enablement role, we want to use our assets to support all of our portfolio, right? But every network request we make, every intro we make, it costs relationship capital. And we actually want to concentrate that activity to the highest performing or highest potential companies. That may be the companies we have the most amount of capital deployed in, or the companies we want to have the most capital deployed in. So I would always recommend that if you're saying, hey, this company needs this company needs this GP says this LP says this, take a step back and say, okay, what is actually the priority for our fund? And how is that going to accomplish our one singular mission, which is to drive outsized returns? And then how can I make sure that I'm focusing my majority of my time and effort on that, because that's what's going to move the needle.
Love it. Yeah, makes a ton of sense. And I would hope that the GPs align your performance criteria and what you're getting evaluated on in line with the firm's priorities and objectives, and that gets updated on a fairly regular basis as well. So
David, this is venture. No one has proper performance metrics or KPIs or any of that.
We actually, so we had a few when I was at Sequoia, like there was some that were just focused on increasing the relationship capital, to your point, right? There was a mandate for every recruiter on the talent team to talk to some gold candidates, even if they weren't on the market, who we'd identified through our internal vouching system as the most trusted and vouched folks that we should just be trying to pull into the Sequoia portfolio. And then also talking to candidates who are actively looking. And they had this KPI, these monthly conversations. So I think you can start to align some of the KPIs for the internal team members. Obviously, if you have the resources of a Sequoia and a larger team, and you have the humans who are able to be having those conversations, but each individual can sort of have their own KPIs in line with their capacity and what the firm's priorities are. But to your point, it's hard, especially when you're kind of first getting started. 100 different things. How do you prioritize? And I think that obviously what we're talking about today is really focused on the network and the relationships of the firm. So where do you start, right? So you're sort of getting this going from the ground up. Maybe you have some spreadsheets, some index cards. Petri, from your side, do you have any tools? What's your tech stack to kind of get started with this?
Yeah, of course. I mean, especially if you're starting out, my biggest recommendation, and this has really influenced the way that I've thought, is quite a few of the problems that you're having, other people are having, and someone has figured out how to solve it. So number one, leverage communities that exist, but also look for SaaS solutions that can provide you with those quick wins, and figure out where you might want to do something more complicated or custom if you have the resources for that, where someone else hasn't solved it for you. So tools like, and this is by no means because I'm doing this webinar that I'm saying this, but tools like the Swarm are exactly the kind of things that you should be finding to say, so there's someone out here who knows this problem really well. They know exactly how to solve it. In this case, how I can scale the network of the firm really quickly and really easily get to an answer of who do we know who's most senior in X company. And that's going to help you start to tell those stories of, we had a portfolio company who wanted to be connected to this list of 10 companies, and we managed to find them super senior leaders and warm intros to 5 of those. So that's very much what's influenced the way that I've built our tech stack at Balderson, that I've gone and found market leaders who are doing great things in specific areas. And then when those people don't exist, I've said, okay, the hard work is for us now. But actually leveraging that combination of build and buy and being smart about it can help you make a splash really quickly, especially when you're quite early on.
Totally. I think we're all fortunate to you, David, and many others in the industry, because I think if I rewind 5 years ago, right, more funds were doing what Aleph, which is an Israeli fund, did, which is build effectively Swarm from the ground up, which is really hard, right? And at the end of the day, to Kashfi's point, we're in the investment business. We're not in the software business, right? We should not be figuring out the most efficient way to scrape LinkedIn data. That's your job, David. And we're going to pay you a reasonable amount of money to do that for us. If you don't mind, though, I want to highlight a step before that, which for folks on this call, very well could be a challenge. And I've seen it at a lot of funds. And Kashfi, I don't know if you've run into this, but going from having your index card in your back pocket, which is your index card, to having your shared network on the web, that is the firm's network, is a huge cultural shift. And depending on the tool you go to, I think there's like an emoji thing you can raise your hands if you've had this experience, but like the subject line versus body versus nothing question of GPs fighting of what info they want shared or private. For any fund of like more than 3 people, that becomes a thing. And the question of we all love each other, we all trust each other, but there's some info that maybe I don't want my whole team to have access to. And there's some relationships that I don't want my whole team to have access to, right? And understanding how are we going to action that relationship nuance is actually really hard. And I think that like we're very fortunate to have the technology solutions that have now made it easy to go from, okay, we want to make this cultural shift to make it happen. But I still think that there's a lot of funds that I've seen stuck in the how do I convince my partnership that we should auth into Google Apps and share all of our email correspondence together in one system?
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more, Corey. I think it's often really underestimated how much of a mental shift that is for people,
Yeah.
especially people for whom like relationship capital is the core of their business and what they're good at. If anyone is in this place, one tip that I can provide is often I find the product is more than the product itself. It's all of the processes and the onboarding and the hand holding around it. And we found particularly for the more senior members of the team that have a lot more of that relationship capital that they've invested in and built up over years, as simple as finding 15 minutes in their diaries and sitting down with them individually to say, this is the information you're sharing, this is what you're not sharing, going through with them, this is how to ring fence what you don't want shared, and doing it with them. That's some of the most precious resource they have, and that 15 minutes pays off so much because you then get to leverage the remaining body of their connections, which is huge for the whole business. So my one tip there would be, don't forget all of the bits around the product. And actually that super simple stuff like the 15-minute onboarding or the Q&A in Notion to remind people, hey, this is what of your Google contacts is shared and this is what isn't, is a game changer.
Yeah, great points. I think from my experience at Sequoia, you're going to have different members of the firm who are more comfortable with sharing, right? Typically, it's a generalization, but the older folks who've been around the traps for a couple of decades are going to just be more wary of sharing their relationships and their data. So sitting down with them in person is really key. And maybe they're fine with it, but they're just too time poor and they're too busy. So that's another huge problem as well, which is they just can't carve out time of the day. And this is where you can maybe loop in their EA if they have one who can support with just connecting, a LinkedIn or connecting an email, which they're often happy to do, but don't want to sign up for a new tool or a new system. But it's a one-time ask, takes a few minutes, and then everyone at the firm can then have visibility into those relationships moving forward, which is massive for everyone else because they're often the most valuable relationships. They're the ones that have been nurtured and built over many, many, many years. So I love that. I think it makes a ton of sense. Corey, interested from your side, we talked about what you should be doing. You've seen this perspective from across many different firms. Are there any mistakes that people should be trying to avoid?
I think we touched on some of them. I think that the most important thing I'll say based on what we just were talking about is you need to remain focused on the fact that these are relationships and you intentionally do not want relationships to scale too much and to become fake. So I'll give you like the good example and the bad example, right? One of my favorite examples, and I won't tell you who it is, but there's a fund that has built, there's a platform person that built relationship automation tooling where every Friday they scrape their calendar, they put all their meetings, they enrich every person they met with their address and some other data, and you can opt in which ones you want to send a handwritten follow-up note to their house, right? And they use handwritten, it's like an API that you use through Zapier, right? Like this is easy stuff to do. But it's not that easy. But if you think about it, right, like you can automate that. Now, the three of us, when's the last time we ever wrote a handwritten thank you note to anyone other than maybe like a job interview 10 years ago? But like, I've received that handwritten note and that relationship is so much stronger. Now, if that became something that all of us did, right, and I hope that the 100 people on this call don't walk away and do it, like it it would fail, right? And I think this is what's happening of like, I don't know, we all have a AI generated video personalization company in our portfolio today, and like that's probably not what we want to do. But think of what are the things you can do that scale and are personal. I think where it becomes challenging is when you don't do what Keshvi just said, which is the pre-work and the post-work, right? Of also training your team how to use this. So what you don't want to do is implement a tool like Swarm and get a really ambitious associate who 4 times a week says, "Hey, can you reach out to you name Tim Cook and Satya and blah 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 tomorrow to introduce me to this founder?" Like that's not going to work. You need to be really thoughtful of what is this tool going to do and what is this tool cultural understanding of that, and how do we make sure that the outreach we do is still genuine? Because for the senior partners who are more hesitant to onboard to a tool like this, one of the reasons is they've built that network through a lot of work through many decades and they don't want to screw it up. And I mean, that is the right thing to do, and I think being intentional there is an important step.
Keshri, any learnings from your side or any common mistakes to avoid that you can think of?
Corey probably highlighted the main one for me, in kind of being pragmatic about where you use these types of products and not abusing them too much. The other one from me, super boring and completely probably expected from a product person, is documentation. I knew it would get this reaction from you. But I mean, the questions that you get will be the same ones again and again, and you will get them now and in 3 months and in 6 months and in 9 months, because the use cases for this type of product, kind of leveraging your network, might be sporadic. So I would really advise invest early on in like a really fun Q&A document that you can just ping to everyone, because especially in some of the larger funds, you don't want to be sitting there saying, you know, my LinkedIn connection's fallen off, how do I fix this, again and again and again.
That's great. Yeah, especially as you know, people are going to be joining the firm, and you're going to be onboarding maybe external folks, you know, into the network that you're building.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Sorry, Kerry, go ahead.
I think the other thing, and David, we've talked about this in the past, is also if you're going to implement a tool, really understanding how it works and why the information is what it says it is. And what I mean by that is there's 10 different tools you can look at, and they're all going to give you a different relationship score. Some of them are just going to use Gmail. Some of them are going to use calendar invites. Some are going to look through what the Swarm does, your professional overlaps and your professional networks and things like this. And some of that data is going to be confusing, right? Like if I worked at Bain, it's going to tell me that I know this person who worked at Bain, but they were an associate at the China office and we overlapped for a month. There's a legitimate reason why there is that overlap, but communicating that I think is hard. And I think we are all in a really interesting industry of venture where our GPs are literally in boardrooms every week being judgmental on products and doing QA and making sure that we're building thoughtful products. So they are going to get into the nooks and crannies and corners of this product and ask questions and say, why does this say that I know this person? I've never met them. And if you can't answer that question effectively, you're going to lose their trust in the system. So I think that being really thoughtful and intentional around the rollout, understanding how and why things work, how and why it's communicated, and making sure that you build your team's trust in the data and the platform is important, because in that first month, if they're like, everything in here's wrong, they're never going to look at it again.
Yep, that's right. Keeping the trust of the the rest of the firm. And I think especially for the platform folks, the lessons that, that I kind of see across a lot of different companies that are successful in doing this is you're going to have the kind of internal champion who's the main kind of point of contact, sort of owning this implementation of the tool, building almost like an internal alliance like of other folks who are going to benefit from it, whether it's the talent folks, customer partnerships, if there's investor ops, like whoever else internally is going to benefit from this, like try and bring them on board into like a smaller group that can then be the folks who are then sort of implementing across the rest of the firm. When it's just like one person, it's just up to you. It's much easier to just say, this doesn't work, or this is going to take too much time, this is too hard to do, and then it doesn't work. And I think people in change management is the kind of often hardest part of this whole thing.
100%. I can definitely second. I call it finding a bragging partner.
Right.
So finding someone else who can champion it for you. On our end, my first bragging partner when we looked at the swarm was an investment team member who was trying to win a deal in a super niche sector and was trying to find people who we knew in that industry. And this person went into the swarm and got an answer to their question in literally 5 minutes and won the deal. And that is like the strongest recommendation you can have to the rest of the organization, rather than me telling you how great this is. Listen to this person who's used it.
You should put that testimonial on the website. I like that one.
I'm copywriting that.
Yeah, I think for folks who haven't come across the swarm yet, the reason why I wanted to build this when I was at Sequoia, to your point, Corey, is like we built this internal system that was like pulling everyone's LinkedIn's, dumping it into a spreadsheet, pulling everyone's email calendar contacts. And it's just like, there's got to be a better way to do this. The thing is, it's really hard, right? Because LinkedIn doesn't play nice with the data. So we've built this GDPR and CCPA compliant way for the user to request a copy of their own data, but we don't get into the profile data, so we then have to build our own massive database, like almost 1 billion people records. We've spent a lot of time doing that, and that's now up and running. Data teams are actually now leveraging that data via the API and buying data from us, which has been really interesting to kind of see how that all evolves. But the data at the end of the day is so important, and having a database that's sort of stale or out of date is going to lose the trust of your customers, internal stakeholders. Is there any advice or things you can think about in terms of data hygiene, data best practices that you've seen work well at companies? Not necessarily using the swarm, just generally, how do you kind of best use data at the firm, and kind of what are the best kind of practices around that?
Go on, Corey.
You want to go first?
No.
I would say, so I'll give one very cynical thing. If anyone is going to rely on VCs, whether it's an analyst or a partner, to accurately and thoroughly and diligently update CRM records and insert notes, you've come from a sales ops world and you've worked at a sales org too long, and that's just not going to happen in venture. I think that our folks are too busy and they're not going to do that. So you need to do one of two things: either have a really strong admin team that helps you there, and that's a part of the process, or rely on third-party data sources that are going to enrich your data. I think the other thing you need to realize, though, is that it's not always going to be right, especially for anyone on this call that's investing in early stage companies. The hardest challenge is you're emailing someone on their Gmail and your CRM is still showing that they're a product manager at Google, but you know that they're a CEO of a company that your fund just funded a week ago, right? And that's intentionally not accessible to the swarm or other data vendors. So I don't have a great answer. I think part of it is being comfortable with 90%, finding ways to augment your data sources with others, and trying to build the infrastructure to sort of double check and update things as needed. But if I had $1 for every fund that has a challenge with maintaining like a portfolio contact list, it'd be a good world.
A lot of dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. The more that you can do for people, particularly on CRM population or like general data population, the better. It would have saved me a lot of pain had I realized that 18 months ago, but that's by the by. I guess the only other recommendation I'd have in the world of like private market data and VCs using data is this is another area where I think less is more. In the sense that I think it's super easy to say this is really exciting data, this is really exciting data, I want to use all the data, but actually because we are in a world of incomplete data, you need to spend a lot of time with each of those data sets to make sure that they are valuable and you can make decisions off the back of them. So I would say pick your battles, figure out the data sets that are really going to move the needle, and really spend the time cleaning them, understanding them. And also that will solve your trust point of you really understand them inside out, you can answer the questions on them. Rather than saying I want 20 sources of data and I'm going to have this huge algorithm. Focus on the areas that are going to make a difference and know them inside out.
Yeah. I'll say, though, that this becomes a challenge with a tool like Swarm and so many others, right? Because I think, and luckily you guys are addressing this and a lot of others are, but like the unique thing to keep in mind as a venture fund is that we are interacting with humans and we're not interacting with someone as a VP at this company and we care about this account, but we care about humans. So we might email them on their company email and then their personal email, and we're going to text them and then we're going to email them on their next email. And they might be a candidate here and then a portfolio company here and then an advisor here and whatnot. And what that means from a data perspective is that identity resolution is really, really hard, right? And I think this is another thing. You just need to tell folks, hey, there actually might be 3 David Connors in our CRM because we have his individual profile from his angel investing. We have his Sequoia profile, which we should actually sunset. And then we have his Swarm profile. And by the way, we also have this. And again, I think it's being intentional and communicating around data structure and things like that, and just realizing our limitations, that maybe that means that identity resolution is just hard.
And it is, yeah. Very hard. Yeah, it is hard. And there's workarounds and there's ways you can just not get bogged down with trying to make it perfect 100%. I think like the 80-20 rule works pretty well here. But we've got a couple of minutes left, so I want to jump into some of the questions that folks have been dropping in the chat. Maitri Shah, what has changed in the VC industry since 2017? Any sector-specific focus that has gained interest? Corey, do you want to cover that?
Yeah, I mean, from an investment perspective, a million things, and I don't think that any of us will comment on that. But I think in this world, what has really changed is that there's been some brave or crazy entrepreneurs that have realized that VC firms have challenges. And it's not a great business to build a software product for VC firms. We're a really small market and a really small TAM and a really complicated customer, but we do need solutions. And I think that it's really cool that in 2024, there are companies like the Swarm that are saying, hey, you know what? You don't actually need to build all of this in-house, and you can get best-in-class software that actually understands you and actually solves your need. And I think it's cool that folks like you, David, are doing this, who have been in our shoes, in this role, in this organization, know the complexities, and actually are invested in hopefully making our life easier. And hopefully it built a good business for you in the process.
Sounds good to me. Yeah. Keshvi, I think final question here from Catherine Swanberg. How can you show the value faster than 10 to 15 years? What a quick win. So maybe let's kind of end with both Keshvi and Corey. What are some quick wins that folks can do, either if you're setting network up for the first time or you're in that role? Any sort of final thoughts and imparting words of wisdom?
Yeah, sure. Number one, use the Swarm. It's great. But no, in all seriousness, whatever tool you choose and however you choose to do this, in terms of quick wins, I would come back to the point that I made earlier on finding a few really tangible use cases. Do your homework before you start thinking about solving things. Go and find and hunt down a couple of really easy to solve with a good tool problems, and then go and deliver on those quickly, because then those people will become your advocates, and then you can go and tackle the bigger problems. So go and find the super high value portfolio company that has a list of kind of go-to-market contacts that we haven't been able to hit yet, or go to your talent people and go and find those few roles that they haven't quite managed to fill yet, or go to your investment team and figure out what are the deals that they're trying to close this quarter and what sectors are those in. Go and hunt those opportunities down and deliver on those really quickly, because even if that 10 to 15 year timeline might feel very far away, if you're pushing the needle in the right direction, it will push things your way.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think also to the earlier anecdote you said, look for those sort of stories of how this has worked, right? I think that communicating to your team, hey, we've made this many intros, or we found this many connections this month, is useful, right? The problem with that is I don't know what N is good. Is 50 intros good, or is 100? I have no idea. But communicating that is good, but also sharing, hey, here's one story that the team might not know that came out of this effort, is what's really, really valuable. And I think we didn't go into the closed loop part of network operations and relationships here, but I think that is one thing I would also recommend people think through, is whether you do it through an automated tool or a manual process. If you're going to use a network operations tool to find connections, you're going to do that outreach. You're going to set up a diligence call or a customer intro or a talent intro or whatever. It's very easy to just send that email and then forget it. But creating a process, whether it's a process you always do or once a quarter you do 10 times over 10 intros, follow up with that CEO and just say, hey, David, was that a helpful intro? What came out of it? Because you'll get more and more of those stories that otherwise might not surface. And Catherine, like, you won't know until 10 years out if that actually made the company worth $1 billion or not, but you might be able to communicate, hey, this actually led to them hiring this person or closing this deal, which really is what's valuable.
Perfect. Corey, Keshvi, thank you again so much for taking the time. My head is swimming with all kinds of different words of wisdom and ideas about what we can build. But thank you again, and thank you for everyone joining, and we'll see you soon. Appreciate it.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.